In February 1944, the United States Navy sank an entire Japanese fleet inside a single tropical lagoon, and most of it is still down there. The lagoon sits in the Central Pacific, in a country called the Federated States of Micronesia, and the locals have a name for what is on the bottom. They call it the Ghost Fleet of Chuuk Lagoon. Around 50 warships, freighters and oil tankers, 275 aircraft, and somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 Japanese sailors and soldiers, all of it sent to the seabed in 2 days of American bombing. 81 years later, in September 2025, the government of the Federated States of Micronesia declared a state of emergency because one of those wrecks had started bleeding fuel oil into the reef at 4,000 litres a day, and the other 49 are sitting on top of an estimated 22 million litres more. That is more than half the volume of the Exxon Valdez spill, the 1989 disaster that killed an Alaskan fishery for a generation, waiting to come out of an 80-year-old hull. And nobody can agree on whose problem it is. And before I get to the answer, let me tell you what I do not mean. I do not mean how the ships got there. If you're watching this, you probably already know that. What I want to know is why the leak that triggered the 2025 emergency on a wreck called the Rio de Janeiro Maru was something marine scientists had been warning about since the early 2000s, and why every single one of the other 49 wrecks down there is now considered a question of when, not if. Because this is not one ship slowly rotting in deep water. This is a fleet sitting in shallow tropical sea, inside a coral reef in a country with 100,000 people, and the timeline is no longer measured in decades. There are 4 reasons the Ghost Fleet is still bleeding, and you cannot understand any of them without first understanding what was actually sent to the bottom of that lagoon in February 1944. To understand why a fleet that big is still down there, you need to know what Chuuk actually was before the Americans came for it. By the early 1940s, the Imperial Japanese Navy had spent 2 decades quietly turning Chuuk Lagoon into the most important forward base in the entire Central Pacific. The geography was almost impossibly ideal. A coral barrier reef nearly 140 miles around, roughly the distance from London to Manchester and back, enclosed a deep, sheltered anchorage capable of holding up to 200 warships at once. Western journalists started calling it the Gibraltar of the Pacific, and by 1944 it was the headquarters of the combined fleet, with 27,000 Japanese troops, 4 airfields, and 200 anti-aircraft guns ringing the islands inside the reef. American war planners estimated that a direct invasion of Chuuk would cost over 20,000 American casualties. So the Americans decided to do something else. On the 17th of February 1944, Admiral Mark Mitcher launched Operation Hailstone. 9 American aircraft carriers and around 500 carrier-based aircraft hit Chuuk in waves over 2 days. The Japanese were caught completely by surprise. By the end of the second day, the Americans had sunk around 50 ships, destroyed roughly 275 aircraft on the ground and in the air, and killed thousands of Japanese sailors and soldiers. The Americans lost about 40 men in total. In 48 hours, Japan's most important Pacific base became an underwater graveyard. 2 of the wrecks down there matter for this story. The first is the Rio de Janeiro Maru, the wreck whose 2025 leak triggered the state of emergency. She was originally built in 1930 as a luxury passenger liner running the Japan to South America route, requisitioned for war in 1940 and converted into a submarine tender. She is sitting upright on the lagoon floor in around 30 metres of water. The second is the Shinkoku Maru, a 152-metre fleet oiler whose entire job was to refuel the Imperial Japanese Navy at sea. She was one of the 8 oil tankers that refueled the Japanese strike force before the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941. She is now lying upright at 39 metres, with most of her original fuel cargo still inside her tanks. This is the bit that got me when I was researching this, And to give you the context for what is coming, there is already a working example of what happens when one of these wrecks finally gives up. And it happened in the same country 200 miles from Chuuk. Her name was the USS Mississinewa, a Second World War oil tanker. She lay on the seabed in the same Federated States of Micronesia, undisturbed for 57 years. Then, in 2001, a typhoon weakened her corroding hull and she started leaking. Within weeks, 24,000 gallons of oil had spilled into the lagoon she sat in. The 700 islanders who depended on that lagoon for their food were banned from fishing for months. The US Navy eventually spent around $6 million pumping the rest of her tanks dry. That was one ship. Chuuk has 50 of her. So the obvious question is why nobody has dealt with this. And the answer is, somebody has been trying since 2017, and after 8 years of work, they have removed less than 1% of what is down there. Quick break before I get to the rest. I keep thinking about the choice the Federated States of Micronesia is facing here, and I am genuinely curious what you would have done. You have around 50 wartime wrecks bleeding fuel oil into the coral reef that feeds your people. The wrecks are not yours, they belong to Imperial Japan, a country that no longer exists. The modern Japanese government considers every one of those wrecks a war grave, with thousands of their men still inside, and they will not pay to disturb them. So, you can leave the wrecks alone, and the reef keeps dying, or you can cut into them, and you disturb a foreign country's war dead with money your country does not have. There is no good option. If you have a thought on which one you would have picked, the comments on these videos tend to be more interesting than the videos themselves, at least to me. And if you find yourself watching to the end of these, the subscribe button is right there too. Back to it. So why is the cleanup so far behind? The reasons compound, and there are 4 of them. The first is the sheer scale of what is down there. The lagoon is roughly 40 miles across, and any cleanup operation has to be repeated 50 times across that area, on every wreck with its own mix of fuel and live ordnance. The Japanese team doing the work, called JMAS, has been at it since 2017, and in 8 years they have pumped out around 60,000 litres of fuel oil, out of an estimated 22 million. That is 0.27%. The second is that the hulls are failing faster than the cleanup is moving. Peer-reviewed studies have measured the wrecks corroding at close to the maximum possible rate for iron in salt water. In 2007, a survey by the Major Projects Foundation found one of the wrecks was leaking so badly that the slick was visible from a satellite in orbit. The clock is not slowing down, it is getting faster. The third is the men inside. The wrecks are the tombs of thousands of Japanese sailors and merchant crewmen. The Japanese government has been clear since the 1970s that the wrecks are war graves, and that any large-scale cleanup operation requires Japanese consent. That consent has not been given. To remove the oil, you have to cut into the tombs. And there is one more factor, and it is the strangest of all. That fleet belonged to Imperial Japan. Imperial Japan no longer exists. Modern Japan will not fund cleanup. The United States destroyed the fleet in Operation Hailstone, but has no clear legal obligation. So under international maritime law, the legal responsibility for cleaning up the largest naval graveyard in the Pacific has fallen on the Federated States of Micronesia, a country with around 100,000 people, a GDP per capita of around $1,557 and a JMAS team member quoted in 2024 saying that a real cleanup of Chuuk would cost billions of yen. FSM does not have billions of yen. FSM does not have millions of yen. And it is not as if nobody has tried. Jacques Cousteau dived the lagoon in 1969 and made the wrecks famous. Subsequent expeditions have surveyed the cargo holds and found Zero fighter aircraft still in their crates, tanks, trucks, artillery shells, and the human remains of the men who never got out. Peter Ayton, Chuuk's historic preservation officer, has been on the public record for years saying that someone has to take responsibility and that the lagoon's people did not ask for the war to come here. In December 2025, locals in Chuuk filed a lawsuit in the FSM Supreme Court, naming Japan, the United States and the FSM itself as defendants. Every attempt has run into the same four walls. The Ghost Fleet is still bleeding because there were too many wrecks to count when they sank. By the time anyone took the leakage seriously, the hulls were too far gone to outpace. The men inside them were too sacred for Japan to disturb. And now, the country that has to deal with it is too poor to afford it. The most important Japanese naval base in the Central Pacific. 50 ships, 275 aircraft, gone in 2 days. And somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 men who never came back up. They have been at the bottom of Chuuk Lagoon for 81 years. They are still there. If you found this worth your time, the next video on this channel is on the German battleship Scharnhorst and why she is still down there too. Subscribe so you do not miss it. I will see you next time.